Question 11.
Question 11.
With atmosphere.
That's right. This is Libby Road and the Sound Epistemology podcast. On this episode, Rupert and I soldier on with number 11 of the Street Epistemology Survey, the survey that creates a space to explore our ideas about truth. Number 11 invokes subjects surrounding intuitions and feelings. We get into testing our sensations and the use of hypotheticals in conversations about sensitive topics. Let's see what else we can learn from this exchange that isn't necessarily a typical street epistemology conversation, but two friends paddling together on the waterways of truth exploration.
Believing something that is false feels just like believing something that is true. Agree. Strongly agree, huh?
Yes. I strongly agree with that.
Okay. Why do you strongly agree with that as opposed to firmly just agreeing with it?
Because well, it happens with me. I can't tell the difference between the feeling of believing something that is false, or I can't I have no way of telling the difference, even if we're just talking about within myself. I can't tell the difference of the feeling of when I'm believing something false and not knowing it, and believing something that's true. Like, it's the same feeling. The feeling is the same.
So the nuance for you is harder for you to discern.
It would take a lot more. It would take a lot more convincing for me to move from strongly agree to just agree.
Mm-hmm.
I would need more evidence. I would need more evidence, more sufficient evidence to sway me down in confidence that this statement is true.
I would suggest that you need more practice listening to what's happening as far as your feelings are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And that might change you from strongly agree to agree. Because I really do feel like believing that something is false feels very similar to something that is true. But to say, I would strongly agree with that, but believing that something is false, believing something that is false feels just like believing something that is true. I don't strongly agree because I think there's still an intuitive part of us that is giving us the information about something being true or false. There's an internal compass that we can shut up long enough to listen to, silence ourselves long enough to listen to, and get in touch with, and increase our intuition and increase the strength of knowing where that needle's pointing. And I am not saying for a minute that I have mastered listening to my intuition, but I have spent every day the last 2 years sitting and practicing listening to that intuition in meditation. And it has brought me to an agree instead of a strongly agree there, because I think especially if I believe that something is false, that there's still, that in addition to that, even though it feels similar, there's still inside there's a little intuitive part that's saying, maybe ask a couple more questions. I think you've felt that.
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to then, no, this is solid, this is sound as a pound. So I think there is a nuance. I do agree, I might even agree firmly with this, and especially to an untrained mind, they feel exactly the same. And I'm not suggesting you have an untrained mind, I just mean, I think there are those that this statement could be 100% even. This could be a black and white thing for some people, which is unfortunate. But what I come back to is that there's a degree of nuance there that the more you listen to it, feels there's a lot bigger gap between how they feel. But that does take training, it takes practice, and it takes silence, it takes listening to your intuition. And that's not necessarily something that we're conditioned to do. It's a choice we have to make to follow, a path of mindfulness or Buddhism, or actually leaning into some of the prayer work, some of the letting the power of God fill us up and operating from that place, versus it being a different relationship and having. I think the thing I like about when I hear about people being filled with the power of God is that when I hear examples of that being used as a way to be present and compassionate and mindful and skillful, then I think that's a very good use of a thing. It's unfortunate that there have been a lot of examples of that being, that's the claim, but that's not actually what's happening. It's just everyone likes, or a lot of people like to hear that God told them to do something, or they're moved by the power of God, and people abuse that to where now I think there's a lot of us that are very, very skeptical when we hear people are hearing God tell them to do something. But if we hear a Buddhist say that, then it's a little bit more comforting to hear. I think there's room for Christians to be using the same intuition, the same connection with Source, for good, for compassionate activity, for active listening, for holding space for people. And that's why I think conversations like the SE conversations, coming, from a genuine place of curiosity, are really nice, because I think there's some good Christians out there.
Sure, certainly. So you're using intuition to get you from being strongly agree to just agree?
I'm saying that
you're basing that on intuition mainly?
I'm basing it on the difference that I feel, because that intuition is part of the feeling. The feeling of false versus the feeling of true, believing that something is false versus believing that something is true, feels different because of the nuance of intuition that's there.
The feelings are different.
Not very much, because you can quite easily feel the same about something being true or about something being false, and you can be convinced of it, and you can have experiments that lead to it, and you can all of this, but there is still this little intuitive part of us, this little internal compass that points where it's going to point regardless, and I think they feel different. And sometimes you're in accord, and sometimes you're in discord.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're paddling with the current, and sometimes you're paddling against it. And I think when you listen, you can tell which direction you're paddling.
You're able to tell the difference between these two feelings, the feeling that something is false and the feeling that something is true. You're able to tell more of a difference between those feelings based on intuition?
based on listening to my intuition, yeah. And it doesn't always work, and it's not always clear, but
how does that listening to your intuition give you information about the difference of the feelings?
there's a different sensation that happens.
You get a different sensation when you're believing something that's false than when you're believing something that's true. Okay, so can you, and you're saying that that's not always reliable?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
How do you tell when the sensation is reliable, when it's not?
Yeah. How do I tell?
You're saying that you can rely on this sensation to sometimes tell you when you're believing something false and when you're believing something's true. How do you differentiate? Like,
I understand the question.
because this would be great to have. If I had this special feeling that I can go to, and I could say, okay, I'm feeling this burning in my right hand when I'm feeling like I am believing something that's true, and then whenever it's a burning in my left hand, that means that I'm believing something that's false. That would be a great resource, because then I could use that to appeal to whenever I can't decide without. So is it a feeling like that? Like you can, because you said there are two different feelings. I guess I'm interested in how reliable that way of telling the difference is.
I understand your question. Because I take half an hour most days to quiet my mind and listen to what is happening in there,
Mm-hmm.
and try and create space around it to allow for it, accept it, I hear what my mind is focused on. And listening to what my mind is focused on guides me towards the things that I need to ask more questions about. And so I have some bad news for you. There is no right hand's hot, left hand's hot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more listening to what's going on in here. What's going on in here?
Mm-hmm.
What do I feel? What are the sensations? Is there is there harmony or is there disharmony? Is there a tension? Is there a tightness? Is there a heat? Is there a choking?
Mm-hmm.
And it's subtle. It's not as obvious as a right hand, left hand. It's really spending some time having enough space and enough quiet to be able to even identify what these sensations are.
Do you have an example you'd like to share that where you remember, I felt this feeling and therefore I was able to tell that I was believing something false? Like, is there a specific feeling that you can describe that is your information giver about the fact that you're believing something false versus the feeling that you get when you're believing that it's true? Are you able to, because like I said, it'd be really nice to be able to have that go to, okay, I'm not really sure if this is the feeling of believing something false versus the feeling of believing something's true. What could I use to differentiate that? You're saying that you have that ability, right? It's really subtle and it takes a lot of listening to what your mind tells you, right?
I'm saying I'm developing that ability.
Okay.
I'm not saying I have it.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying that I am coming closer and closer to having that ability be clearer and clearer, that right now it's like looking out of a window. And before, I had the curtains drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And now the curtain's open, but there's still that, at your grandparents' house you had the lacy thing up. That's still there. But now I can see through the window.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can see that there's information out there that I didn't see before. I just saw racing cars or whatever was on the curtains. And that at some point I'll be able to see through the window. It might be a dirty window for a while. So I'm developing that. But I'm trying to think of specific examples, because it's not just some intangible thing.
Right. That's kind of what I'm. That's what I'm trying to get a clear picture about. Maybe I can throw this out there. Let's say we met a lifelong meditator that spends, 8 hours a day meditating and really listening to what their mind tells them, and they're able to use their intuitions very skillfully, and they've gotten to the point where they feel like they've developed enough to be able to tell the difference between the feeling of being right and being wrong and not knowing it. If we met that person and it was demonstrated that that their feeling of being of believing something true was the same feeling as believing something false, if that person, and we were convinced that they had this, or you were convinced that they had developed their ability to do this, and it was shown to you, to your satisfaction, that that feeling was actually the same even with that person, would that have any effect on this idea of having the ability to tell the difference between the feeling of believing something that's false and the feeling of believing something that's true?
Yeah, I mean,
it was a really long question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's quite a big what if. It's quite a
yeah. Oh, it's completely hypothetical. Somebody walks in the room and we're convinced that they're a lifelong meditator and
they've achieved some level that I'm aiming for,
right?
And they've come to the conclusion that there is no difference between feeling something is false and feeling something is true,
right?
And
how would that affect your confidence that there is a difference in the feelings?
Yeah, well, and of course it would if that were to come to pass, but it's a hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of use for me in hypotheticals because it's really just an antagonistic thing to throw out.
Really?
Well, I think so.
You don't see...
Hypothetically, what if we met someone that could live their life that way, and that there was no similarity at all between false and true? How would that impact my feeling?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, clearly, the hypothetical is set up to ask me to believe stronger or weaker.
Yeah, what would it take for you to reconsider it?
It would take me having confidence that I was able to listen consistently enough and then experiencing the same feeling about something as being false, as being true. It would take that little nuance that I feel now even, that I believe would develop, but I don't think it's going to be as blatant as left hand, right hand.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to take a lot more listening than just, I'm suddenly going to wake up with divine, intuition. I don't think it's going to be that. I think someone that's meditated for 8 hours a day, as you say, could have a bad day and get out of balance with it. So I don't think there's it's not like a black belt in jiu-jitsu where you've achieved certain things.
Right.
And even a black belt in jiu-jitsu, I think it's that, what the fuck does that mean? It just means you've attained a certain level of knowledge. It doesn't mean that you're infallible. It doesn't mean you're always going to win.
Could that feeling of it being two different feelings be one of these examples of where the feeling is actually the same?
Say again.
The feeling you have that the two feelings are different, could that be another example of what we're experimenting here with, exploring here, where it's, could that feeling that you have be one of these feelings that you can't tell the difference whether it's true or false?
Oh, right, I understand the question. I don't think so, because there's a bit of obvious to the sensation, and I really do like that my stepdad brought this one to me, that there's a difference between what it feels like to be paddling alongside each other and letting the river take us, than to be paddling in different directions. There is a really pretty blatant, obvious distinction between how those two feelings are, and I believe that's what we're talking about here, on a very nuanced level, on a way more subtle level. But I think there's a river that we're participating in, and there's a distinct feeling that's different between pushing against and flowing with. I really do feel like that's, yeah.
I want to make sure that I understand. You're saying there's an obvious difference between the feeling of believing something true and believing something false.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm saying that there is a difference. There's a distinct difference.
There's a distinct difference
I'm
between...
not saying it's obvious.
Okay. You're saying there's a distinct difference between the feeling of believing something true and the feeling of believing something false.
Yeah, there's a distinct difference, but a highly nuanced difference. So you're using language that presupposes something obvious, something left hand, right hand detectable,
Yeah.
and what I'm trying to convey to you is it's about the difference between this hair and this hair. So I don't know if you can detect what this hair feels like versus this hair. If you can, then you're understanding what I'm proposing. If you can understand the difference between what these hairs feel like and these hairs feel like, I think that's more what you're trying to, or that might be more what you're understanding I'm suggesting, and I'm not suggesting that.
Okay. Yeah, I want to use your terminology, so I'm using, because you said obvious a little bit ago, like there's an obvious difference.
Yeah,
and then
you can listen to it. If you can get to where you can slow down and listen enough to perceive the difference between the two hairs, and I believe we can. And I've glimpsed it in my own practice.
Okay.
And more so the more I practice. And that's what I'm pointing to. And when you get to that level of clarity, that is obvious. But I think it's a journey to get there, and I think it's a journey to practice it.
You're on your way to being able to tell the difference between believing something true and something false.
Or understanding the difference between the two feelings, yeah.
Okay. So if you think those feelings, if you think that the difference between those feelings exist, then why do you agree?
Why do I agree?
Yeah. If the feelings are the same.
I don't think very many people stop and listen.
Yeah.
I lived 47 years and didn't stop and listen very often.
So you're using this statement for other people?
And myself.
And yourself, okay.
My own history, yeah. Yeah, I believe something that was false felt exactly like something that was true.
In the past, for you. You've experienced that.
Yeah.
And you're convinced
that if I had trained myself earlier on, I could have stilled myself enough to be able to listen to my compass and make some different decisions, I think.
Okay. Let me try to land this, because
Go ahead.
you're currently you're saying that there is a difference between the feeling of something being true and the feeling of something being false. But you're agreeing at the same time that believing something that is false feels just like believing something that is true. Is that accurate?
Not just like, but extremely similar to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean extremely similar to, where I might even forgive you saying just like, but because we're talking about the difference between 0 and 1 and 99 and 100,
Right.
I do want to point out that there's the sensations of the two hairs that are wholly unique to each other, if we can listen to them.
I'm using just like because that's what the statement says.
Yeah, sorry if it seems like I'm attacking you.
Yeah, no, I
apologize.
think it's important to differentiate, because one little word can change a lot of how we approach a statement like this.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, like feeling myself get some feeling of defensiveness come up in me, and then realizing, well, and then as we're talking, sort of, oh, where's that coming from? And then the confidence in knowing that I've sat for half an hour for 2 years now, and what that experience has been. And then of course, and what's interesting as well, you talk about the person that meditates 8 hours a day. For me, that is no goal of mine.
Yeah.
I think that's a waste. That would be a waste of my life. I really do, because I think half an hour is about how long you want to be working out your biceps. Then go use your fucking biceps.
Yes.
That's the goal for me. Beautiful that someone would be able to sit for 8 hours and that's their life. I don't know what practical application that has, other than maybe increasing all of ours general well-being, because that I have a practitioner that I've learned a lot from that says, when we're talking about in the harbour, when one boat rises, all boats rise, and so I see value in that.
Yeah.
But for me, it's an exercise, it's a workout that I do so that I can, when I'm doing the rest of my day, be a little bit more present and be able to feel that nuance a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But I think it would be impractical for me to be having an 8-hour-a-day
Right.
meditation.
Yeah, and that was just like I said, hypothetical example of. I want to talk about hypotheticals more with you, though.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I see a lot of value in it,
Yeah.
especially with conversations like
I think
this.
it's, and that's where the defensive came up, because of the hypothetical.
Yeah.
And I think that's you probably come up against that a lot. Someone who's hypothetical and they're like,
Yeah.
"Are you kidding me?" They're feeling dismissed. So I felt that coming up.
And that's good to know, because that helps me present the hypothetical maybe a little bit in a different way, to where they don't feel like defensive. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you can more skillfully present a hypothetical, then it's gonna be easier for the defensiveness to not be triggered.
Yeah. Well,
For the conversation to keep going.
yeah, I want to talk more about that.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.